Tommy Robinson, a journalist and political activist in England, was recently arrested, sentenced and imprisoned on the same day. He was sentenced to 13 months in prison. Now, I'll describe who Tommy Robinson is for those who don't know in a few minutes. But first, he was dragged before a trial with no jury and no counsel. In other words, no lawyer. This is England. We're talking about a secret court, a secret trial. Now he's being held somewhere and nobody really knows where. He's being held in a secret location. This is the sort of thing that you expect to happen in a socialist regime, right? Where political dissidents disappear. Not in England, which is supposed to be part of the civilized, free world. But there was no jury. And I know that a lot of Americans will think, well, this couldn't happen here in the US, because we have the Sixth Amendment of the Bill of Rights, right? That guarantees a speedy and public trial and the right to a jury of your peers. We do have the Sixth Amendment, and it's wonderful. But in a sense, so do the Brits, and yet this is happening anyway. It's not as strong as the Bill of Rights, sure, but they do have something kind of equivocal, called the Magna Carta. It was signed into place in the year 1215. The British people sort of rioted and forced the king, to sign it. He was afraid not to, King John at the time. And it guarantees that people have a right to a trial by a jury of their peers. It's pretty familiar. But here we have Tommy Robinson, who just got sentenced without that jury, and it's pretty common over there. You see, it began with complacency on the part of the people, if you ask me. It wasn't all of a sudden they were like, okay, no juries for you. It rarely happens like that when people's rights are stripped away. Instead it was, well, juries are expensive, so we're going to save the taxpayers some money. Right? It was for the good of the little man. The irony doesn't escape me. So that was one of the reasons. And then there was, well, it takes a lot of time for people to come and do jury duty. So how about if we just get rid of juries for all but the most extreme cases? So in other words, now, if you're held for a crime like, I don't know, something fairly severe like burglary, you probably won't have a jury in England. You will probably for a murder case still, for now. But that's where it's gone. So for most cases, you don't have a right to a trial by jury, something that's kind of heralded as basic amongst civilized countries that have democracies or republics and so on. So if it can happen there, when it is codified into the Magna Carta, then it can happen here, where it is codified into the Bill of Rights, if people are complacent enough. It's kind of like the thing with, the gay wedding cake story, right? Where the Christian bakers are essentially being charged with being Christian, because they didn't want to decorate a cake for a gay wedding. They didn't want to participate in what was offensive to their religion, right? To their very core. And that should be protected by the First Amendment, which guarantees freedom of speech and freedom of religion. But still, it's now at the highest court in the land, when it should be so basic. So don't take your rights for granted. Just because they're in that document, you have to fight for them, because otherwise they will be taken from you by an ever-expanding government. Now let me tell you who Tommy Robinson is, because you need to know. Tommy, like I said, is a journalist and political activist who, for the past decade, has been fighting against mass, often illegal, but regardless, illegal immigration from the Middle East, right? Muslims who don't integrate into society. That's what he's been fighting against, and especially what really got his attention and got him working in the public sphere was when he was working to try and protect young girls who were being targeted by Muslim gangs. That's what he's been fighting to expose. And he has gone against an amount of public ridicule and attack that is actually hard for me to grasp. And that's one of the reasons that he's being charged now. You see, a few years ago, I think about a year and a half, 2 years, he was charged with contempt of court for filming himself as he was on the steps of the courthouse and going just inside the courthouse. That's illegal in the UK. He didn't know it at the time, but he was there live streaming on his phone. For that offence, which a lot of people wouldn't have actually been charged with, they would have been told by the police, hey, stop, cut that out, and that would have been the end of it. He was sentenced to 3 months, in prison, and then he was given a 13-month suspended sentence, which here in the US would be called probation. This time, he was standing outside the court again, but he was careful. He realized what the law was. He stayed out, not even on the steps, out on the public sidewalk, and there he was, live streaming himself, talking once again about these Muslim gangs, because that's who was going to court that day. And he wanted to expose it. There was no other media there. It was the day of the verdict for several members who had been part of these Muslim gangs who had been raping young 11, 12, 13-year-old girls en masse. And he wanted to expose it. And so he was there, outside the courthouse, on public property, on a sidewalk, live streaming, and he gets arrested. Now he was told at the time, and this was caught in several live streams and by his cameraman, he was told that he was being charged with breach of peace. One police officer there said incitement. It sounded like, I'm not sure if she said incitement or incitement of racial hatred. It was kind of iffy. But either way, he wasn't charged with any of that. He was just charged with contempt of court according to the official documents that people have been able to grab. And there he was on the sidewalk recording. This is not something that anybody wants reported. And I can prove it to you, because after he was taken to court himself, the judge ordered that nobody could talk about what had happened to Tommy, his arrest and his immediate imprisonment for 13 months, until the case of these rape gangs was over. That judge issued an order prohibiting the press from reporting on Tommy's case, from reporting on what has happened. I find that actually difficult to grasp. This judge is called Jeffrey Marson. And this isn't the first time he has come out against the people. This judge, back in 2014, he issued a report threatening, quote, bloggers and social media users, as he called them, not to disrupt the trial of the student who'd attacked a teacher. You might wonder, how does a blogger or a Twitter user, how are they going to disrupt a trial? Are they going to march in there? No, they're going to report on it. He has a problem with the public knowing what's going on. He doesn't realize what his job is. You see, his job is not to keep the people in the dark. His job is to enforce the law that the people put in place. I mean, the very laws at which he is supposed to cast some kind of judgment are supposed to be put in place to execute the will of the moral of the people. That's it. So the people have certain morals in their culture, and this is why culture is important. It's because it distinguishes what we consider to be right from wrong, and what we consider to be right and wrong enough that we codify those morals into our laws. And the things that are so egregious, that are illegal, that is what people are supposed to be sentenced for. But this judge thinks that he should instead keep it from the public, from those people who are supposed to be making the laws, in a sense. There is a real risk, even here in the United States, of judges who are, it's often referred to as legislating from the bench, right? Who make their courtrooms into legislative social justice playgrounds. That's a real risk. And it happens all over the country with judges deciding what they think that the law should be, instead of what they actually are. And that sort of happened in this case, in which Tommy Robinson was charged with something that doesn't really fit what he was doing. Right? Because he was charged with contempt of court, but he's there on a sidewalk, live streaming what happened. The thing that I find most disconcerting about this is that the media is silent. You see, yeah, I get it. The judge issued an order prohibiting the press from reporting, but that should only apply to the British press, right? Well, it doesn't. At least it should. The British press isn't reporting on it. That much is true. But neither is the American press. See, there are cases in which, certain agencies you would think would report on it. Places like Breitbart, which a lot of us visit for, news that you can't get anywhere else. Well, on the day in which Tommy was arrested, I went by Breitbart, and they had a headline about Tommy Robinson, and I clicked through, and there was nothing there. It had been removed. And apparently, Breitbart has a division in the UK, and that's why their UK division couldn't report it. I get that. I still think that they should have reported it on their US site. Then there's Fox News. Even Fox has not said a word. The personalities that a lot of people look at as the last bastion inside, the big media of real journalism. It hasn't said anything. Nothing from Tucker Carlson or from Hannity. Not a single word. And this means that on the basis of what some judge in some, totalitarian country, which the UK or England obviously is at this point, can change what we in the US see in our media, can alter public discourse here in the United States. That's kind of unfathomable. I can understand being afraid if you're a media outlet over in England. I think that's horrendous. But I can understand. If you're here in America, you ought to drop your UK outlet. If you had an outlet in Cuba, right, that was telling you what you could and couldn't report, and that was affecting your ability to report here in the US, you drop the Cuba outlet. Stop seeing England as some bastion of democracy. Stop seeing it as a civilized country if it's affecting the way that you can run your business in a free country. And it clearly, evidently is. We know that Fox knows about it because there's just been a protest to release Tommy Robinson, right? And it's been big in London, and there have been thousands of people showed up with less than 24 hours of notice, and that's incredible. But they ended up blocking traffic because London is small. It's like it was built for horses and carriages or something. But the streets are really small, and you can result in blocking traffic without even meaning to. These thousands of people were gathered outside of Downing Street, which is like the equivalent of Pennsylvania Avenue. You're like standing outside the equivalent of the White House. That's what people were doing. They were there protesting, and then they went by Parliament, which is like going by Congress. They wanted to make their voices heard, and I know that Fox knows. But if you've heard about this story before, even before you saw me, you didn't hear about it from the big media. You heard about it from somebody independent, or even from a friend. And that shows how influential you are. Because these independent people, or these friends of yours, are just as powerful as you are now. Because without the internet, Tommy's case would not be heard. We're both cursed and blessed at the same time. Kind of cursed to live in an age in which some, judge, some terrible authoritarian judge can affect the media, but blessed to live in an age where we can still communicate regardless of it. Imagine if this had happened 30 years ago. None of us would even know about what happened with Tommy. Heck, he would have just disappeared, right? Because he was live streaming at the time in which he was arrested. On this trumped up charge. He was live streaming, so people, thousands of people, were able to see him get arrested for nothing. They saw like an hour's worth of footage of him just walking around doing nothing. But if he hadn't been live streaming, he would have just disappeared off the streets. And none of the big media sources would have tried to check it out because some authoritarian judge had taken it upon himself to silence them. Do you remember when the press was united in fighting to maintain a free press? Remember that? Now, there's nothing. And it's maddening. And if it weren't for independent journalists and even just regular individuals on the internet, we wouldn't even know. Now, Tommy is a public figure, right? And he has thousands or tens of thousands watching those live streams and watching him and rant and rave about these gangs and about the young girls who are being attacked and abused. He's a public figure. Now, if the media won't report on when a public figure is taken off the streets on a trumped-up charge and locked away for 13 months, what do you think they're not telling you? Now, this is a serious issue for consideration. Remember, even Fox hasn't yet said a word about it, and as far as I know, they're not going to. Until this trial of the Muslim rape gangs is over. I don't know, 6 months, 9 months, who knows how long that's going to be. But if even they won't report about a public figure who's dragged away in this sorry excuse for democracy, then what other egregious examples are there? How many other people are being dragged off the streets for something that they said, or for something that they investigated? And how many countries can determine what in the US we can see and respond to and even get to debate about? It's a legitimate question because we will never know how much we don't know. We take it for granted that we know things because we assert, especially in America, that we have a free press, right? We have the First Amendment, and we're better as a result. All of that is true, and I love America, for all of those reasons. But this is the first time I've ever had to look and say that cesspit that I fled from, that is the UK, is preventing Americans from being able to fully exercise their rights to freedom of speech and freedom of expression. I mean, the journalists over at Fox can't speak because they're afraid they might be, I don't know, sued or jailed over in England. If you're a company and you have a station over there, I can't say it enough, get out. You might as well have one over in Cuba trying to dictate, what Americans can do. And don't underestimate your ability as an individual, because you're all there is now. In this particular story, you are all there is. Because there aren't any, massive media organizations like Fox. Sure, that there are good people, good independent journalists who are reaching out, but they depend on individual people. So spread the word, and don't forget about Tommy. He's in prison now for 13 months. When he was previously in prison, he was attacked and almost killed by radical Muslims. Now, there is no radical Islam. Islam is Islam. But there are Muslims who follow the Quran exactly, and as a result, they are radical and they are evil, and there are those who don't. It's kind of the opposite of Christianity. When you follow the Bible religiously, you're a good person. When you don't, Okay. So don't forget about Tommy. When you go to sleep tonight and you're laying in bed, think about where he might be. Wondering whether or not he's going to be able to get to the next night. Fight every day, because you're all there is. There isn't anybody else speaking out for him but individual people. And if you're in the US, be aware there might be people in the UK that are afraid of being arrested for what they say, for speaking out for somebody that they care about or believe in. And even if they don't believe in his cause, even if they think he's wrong about everything, they don't think he should be arrested on a trumped-up charge and thrown away without a jury. They might be afraid to say that. So speak for them. Thank you. If you like this video, and I don't mean you liked the subject matter, but if you liked hearing the perspective and the news that you won't hear at a lot of places, then please subscribe and hit the bell if you're watching this on YouTube. Either way, there's other ways to subscribe listed in the description below. Subscribe to at least one other method, because it's very difficult to get the word out. And if you'd like to support these videos and what I'm trying to do, I provided ways in which you can do that in the description also. I'd appreciate whatever you can do to help. Thank you so much.
Health-wise.